Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The A Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host.
Happy holidays from A Better Way to Farm. We're going to go ahead and put out one of the days of nutrients. This will be day 9. We're going to talk about chloride and we're going to talk about moly. Let me encourage you on Christmas Eve, find a church somewhere and go. It's just a great evening and we would encourage you to do that. If you live close enough to us, we'd love for you to come and join us. We're going to do a Christmas Eve service. We'd love to have you there. So that being said, let's dive in here and talk about what we know about chloride and about moly. We'll do both of these today. Chloride is an element that I think there's some misinformation around. Working out of the Midwest book here, the first thing that they come in and talk about with that is looking for chloride. We know we get a lot of stock strength out of it. We know, guys, that we get disease resistance. We know that we get photosynthesis. We know we get water regulation. We also know that it can cause toxicity, and too much of it will damage plant cells. Chloride is formed from chlorine. We know that chloride is an ion of chlorine, and it has one more electron than chlorine. So what happens is that we see that an oxidation takes place, we lose that electron, and then that chloride can turn into chlorine. What's the problem with that? Well, chlorine is a gas, and we know that it is a gas that is heavier than atmosphere. It's interesting because I quoted some studies earlier here when I did potassium, and the University of Minnesota had done quite a few studies, and they've been talking about this, that if you're going to put potassium chloride on in front of soybeans, they encourage you to do it in the fall to give the chloride a chance to dissipate. Chloride in and of itself will go into the plant more readily than about anything else, and that causes a toxicity. We also know that, like I said, when it loses one ion, it becomes chlorine. Chlorine's a gas heavier in the atmosphere, so it lays down low and lays right on top of the soil. So we're creating a poisonous gas that's actually staying right down there at that level of the plants. Obviously, it's very hard on any bacteria that are beneficial, and it's just basically hard on anything that it comes in contact with. Talking from Neil here, he says he had a client in California who reported that his soil was hard as concrete, and his thumb could only get into deep as his thumbnail, and it was hard from there on. They have extreme amounts of sodium and chloride in many of the Western soils. What they did was use a soil conditioner at a very high rate. It was 1 ounce per 1,000 foot once a month. That would equate to about 1 gallon per acre in an attempt to condition that soil. And after they did that, it did work, and they were able to get that down to a point where they could push their finger down into the dirt. Also looking at chloride, let's consider the trace element chlorine. It is a more recent addition to the list of micronutrients. Chlorine in the soil, in the form agronomists are talking about, is actually chloride. It plays an important role in photosynthesis. Common deficiency symptoms would include leaf chlorosis and necrosis. Some of the research on chlorine has been done in North Dakota and Minnesota. From the research that's been done in the South, chloride causes gummosis disease in citrus, the first year in lemons, and after 15 years on grapefruit. Not anything that we want to do. Because the potassium is present in such high amounts in pounds per acre, some have decided that it must be the chloride in the 0060 providing the response. They're talking about the fact that they ran a test, they used 0060 potassium chloride. When they did that, they got a yield response, and so they went out and they said, well, obviously we're getting a response to the chlorine. However, when the same test was replicated using potassium sulfate, they got the same results. Potassium sulfate has basically no chloride in it, and the response was still obtained. What does that tell us? It tells us that it was a potassium response. Now, all of a sudden, agronomists come along saying that chlorides give a response to wheat production and various other crops. What I really wonder is this. Since many researchers do not understand, and many even reject base saturation percentages, and they deal with soils that are below 2% potassium saturation, it is actually the potassium given the response, while the credit has been being handed to chloride. Guys, anytime more than 250 parts per million chlorides show up in our test, there's a possible problem. Some concentrations reach as high as 3,000, but when we get to just 500, it is definitely a problem. By far the biggest part of the problem with such situations occur is when the sodium content is also excessive. Whenever there is 5 to 10% base saturation of sodium, a problem should be expected. Guys, we know that too much sodium and potassium together in the soils is going to create some trouble for us. We're well aware of that. And when we do that, then adding the chloride in there only exacerbates that problem. The Western Handbook, of course, is going to talk about what happens when we are short in it, and chlorine is the latest element established as an essential micronutrient. In the plant life, it is believed to stimulate the activity of some enzymes and to influence carbohydrate metabolism, the production of chlorophyll, the water-holding capacity of the plant tissue. Generally, there is no deficiency of chlorine in soils because normal rainfall will probably supply sufficient chlorine to maintain a normal supply in your soils. In other words, they're saying they just don't see deficiencies, and we don't either. I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm not saying it isn't something that we should be looking at, something we need to be paying attention to. As life changes, we need to be forever saying, what do we got to do to move to the next level? And maybe doing some tissue testing for chlorine would be a good idea. Maybe doing some soil testing for it to check it out and see. But the bottom line is, we do know that we have seen toxicity from it. We have seen yield reduction in it, especially in soybeans when applied in the spring. The University of Minnesota has well documented that. And so we're probably more concerned with overuse and underuse. You guys know that we are not a fan of potassium chloride. We are big fans of, if you're going to dry broadcast or ban either one, potassium sulfate we would find to be a far superior product for you, or potassium thiosulfate as a liquid. We just feel like that there's a lot more benefit to you. We feel like you get a lot more use out of your potassium with that. As I talked to Dr. Mulvaney, he would agree with that. And so I would encourage you to go find some of the podcasts that we've done with Dr. Mulvaney on the potassium paradox and give those a listen. I want to jump over into the other part of this and talk about moly. And moly is something that we've seen several people use. We haven't been able to be predictable with our usage on it. That is something that I do not enjoy. I absolutely do not like to see something that I'm throwing darts at a board on. Moly is needed for the symbiotic fixation of nitrogen by legumes. We know that. It is vital for the reduction of nitrates and in the synthesis of protein by all plants. So, once again, here's something else that will, when we're short in it, probably going to create a nitrate toxicity in the plant. Not our friend, not what we want to do, but we're still trying to figure out where it is. There is a good soil test for it. I'm very comfortable with Midwest Labs analytical work on moly. What I'm not comfortable with is that any of us have come up with a specific way to make a recommendation using it. What are the symptoms? Moly deficient plants are stunted and yellow in color. They closely resemble nitrogen deficient plants. It is used with nitrogen utilization and very small amounts are needed. Plants containing an excess of moly are toxic to livestock. Again, we're probably as worried about the toxicity here as we are with the shortage. Have a friend over in Illinois. First year I met him, he had used moly, a lot of moly in a lot of locations and had fantastic results and was all jacked up about it. Went back the next year, tried to duplicate, do the same thing, and got zilch. And that was very discouraging because we thought we were onto something and we had figured some things out. And we'd figured out that we were incorrect in that. And so we didn't want to launch off down that road and have people doing the wrong thing. We're going to continue to look at it, continue to study it, see what we can come up with, learn more about it, and try to get some predictability in it. We do know that, according to Neil, that moly will remain available at a pH close to 7 because of the effects the pH has on the element. For the most parts, pH of 6.5 will keep your phosphorus available. At 7 or below and all the way down to 5, boron will stay available. As the increase towards the pH of 6 comes into view, the amount of copper and zinc will decrease. And at 6.5, a caution flag goes up for each of the above nutrients. So there is some pH things to consider here with all of these nutrients, and knowing that moly is most available at a neutral pH. That means when we get away from that, we're probably more suspect to trying to figure out what we need to do with it and how we need to manage it, and if we need to tissue test or soil test and see if we need to put some on. Moly is the only micronutrient for which availability increases as the pH goes up. It's the only one that gets more available when the pH goes up. It is especially important to nitrogen fixing in legumes. However, Moly should not be applied when copper levels are deficient. In such cases, a proper application of both is necessary. Too much moly will make your copper not available. If you're already low in copper, you exacerbate that problem by coming in and applying moly. So we don't want to be doing that. We just got to be aware of everything. Again, guys, we don't think I wish I had a silver bullet. Oh, how I wish I could invent a product that would just automatically give all of you 50 bushel in soybeans and 100 bushel in corn. That'd be fantastic. But the fact of the matter is, yield increases come from doing a lot of things correctly. A lot of little things that we just do over and over again to get them correct. On crops with adequate fertility that test low in copper, when we fail to get a response to the copper applications, a moly test should be considered. Both need to be present adequate amounts, as since either one can influence the amount of crop can take up of the other one. What's he saying? He's saying also, even though we don't want to put moly on where we're copper deficient, we don't want to put copper on if we're moly deficient. And if we put copper on and we don't get a yield response when we know we had low copper levels, then what we want to do is say, hey, what are we going to do here in order to make this work? And the answer may be to apply moly with the copper. From our sheet, the rules of essential nutrients in plants, dropping back to chlorine. Again, it does interfere with phosphorus uptake. We know that. Too much chlorine will really mess with that. It can enhance the maturity of small grains on some soils. Guys, the only work we've ever seen on that was one test done out in Kansas showing a yield increase on wheat. I'm not opposed to doing anything that works, okay? I am opposed to doing a shotgun approach because somebody got something to work one time, one place, one location. In regards to moly, they say that moly is required to form the enzyme nitrate reductase. And that's what reduces the nitrates to ammonium in plants. And we know that plants take up ammonium in and they take up nitrate in, but we know that you have to convert some of that back. That's why we like to see a 50-50 mix of ammonium and nitrate, and it takes this nitrate reductase in order to do that. We also know that moly is important in the formation of legume nodules, and we know that it is needed to convert inorganic phosphates into the organic forms. I did a little searching here to come up with a couple of other things. One of them was the key effects of moly on corn. Moly is an essential component, again, of the enzyme nitrate reductase that converts the nitrate back into ammonium, which we need. The ammonium is what's used to produce proteins and other organic end compounds necessary for growth. So a lack of moly is going to lead to the accumulation of unused nitrates in the leaves, causing an N deficiency symptoms. We also know that it helps with photosynthesis. We know that moly application has been shown to increase the water use efficiency in corn because it helps the plants better tolerate drought stress conditions by influencing stomatal control. In other words, how much does the stomata open up and how much moisture do we give off? We also know that it improves the application of other nutrients like phosphorus and sulfur, and it does work into those metabolic pathways. The flip side of it is corn does have a high tolerance for moly, but excessive amounts, especially high rates from foliar application, can be toxic, reducing the plant biomass and impairing copper uptake. Guys, you're going to foliar feed this. Be very cautious. Very, very cautious. We have a product that has moly in it, but it is a very, very small amount because we know that the downside there can get into our pocketbook if we're doing the wrong thing, and we don't want to do that. In soybeans, moly significantly can boost soybean production by enhancing the nitrogen fixation via the nitrate reductase activity and promoting plant growth, leading to higher yields, better protein, and better nutrient use, especially on acidic soils. That's where you might consider doing more work with this. The deficiency will mimic a nitrogen lack. It will cause yellowing and poor nodulation, so proper application, often with boron, is crucial for a robust nitrogen metabolism and grain fill. Moly is vital for rhizobia bacteria to convert atmospheric nitrogen into usable forms. Higher nitrogen availability and enhanced photosynthesis lead to better plant height and root biomass and overall grain yield. We enhance photosynthesis again, and we get better nutrient use. It also influences hormones like abscisic acid, signaling the plant to direct resources to developing grains. And so, yes, moly is important. Yes, if it was a highly more acidic soil, that's probably where we would take a look at trying some. Again, feel free to run the test through Midwest Labs. They're more than happy to do that for you. Guys, we're down to 3 days. As we wrap up and we run through our 12 days of nutrients, we're going to finish up with iron and manganese and zinc. and then we'll maybe do a recap and put the whole thing together. I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and just thanks from all of us here. If you want to get a hold of us for any reason, text Karen 641-919-5570. Thank you guys. Look forward to a new podcast coming out. There's always plenty of those. Give those a listen. And as always, we hope you're having a very, very Merry Christmas season.